Hello and welcome to another episode of the Corner 3 here on Pittsburgh Sports Live in the Beaver County Auto Studios. Cale Berger, Alan Saunders back with you as always. And we had kind of a really NBA heavy show last time out where it's going to be real college heavy today as we have the start of conference play for pretty much every conference except the Big Ten starting this week. So want to get into some talk about teams that really surprised us both positively and negatively that first unofficial half of the season. And then the second half of the show today, we're going to be doing some Pitt UNC preview as the Panthers get ready to start conference play coming up on Saturday. So first things first, Alan, there's been a lot of teams, I think, early on this season that, as there are every year, but teams that have kind of impressed us with their play, something we didn't expect from them, and some teams that really, I guess, didn't meet or live up to the expectations that they had set pretty high for them this season. I know I have a few thoughts on some of those teams. And what's your first team you would say is one that I think disappointed this year early on?
I think Kentucky, it wasn't just that they lost to Duke and how they lost to Duke, but they didn't respond to that loss very well. Yep. Obviously Kentucky's going to be a young team just because of the nature of the one-and-dones and the way Coach Calipari is recruiting that right now is that they're going to be inexperienced, but we haven't seen that happen to them yet, where they really went into an extended stretch of poor play in the non-conference schedule against teams that are frankly not at their level.
Yeah.
I was really disappointed with that stretch from Kentucky. They got a big win over Louisville, so maybe that's sort of them turning back into the team that we thought they were.
They always beat Louisville.
They did well,
under Calipari.
And it's a it's not the same Louisville team as it was 3 or 4 years ago. But to me, the thing that kind of Kentucky's been disappointing, but the rest of the SEC hasn't done much either, and so I don't feel like you could write them off from that. But I think if you're looking at like number one seeds, for example, I don't think you'd have Kentucky in the mix right now. If you're looking at even teams that you're looking at, to put in their own regional, to me, they're just kind of right on that line as things stand right now. I think the Big 12 has better teams. I think the Big 10 has better depth. I think, and there's a lot of good teams in the ACC that I think would give Kentucky a really good game. Louisville is not the cream of the crop in the ACC, and they played right with Kentucky. So, I don't think that they're not Kentucky. They're just a pretty good basketball team.
They've certainly not met those expectations that I think are either wrongfully or rightfully set for them at the beginning of every season. But I think also Kentucky's one of those teams where it's going to take them time every year to figure things out. And I kind of, at this point, give Calipari the benefit of the doubt when it comes to his team will figure it out. And once it comes March, once it comes that time of year, they're going to be one of the most dangerous teams in the country because they have all that talent and they will be playing their best basketball, at that point of the season. A team for me that really I think has been a disappointment is Purdue. Purdue was a team that was ranked pretty high starting the year. A lot of hype, especially around Carl Edwards, their shooting guard, really one of the best players in the country. And they're a team that's really, I just had a really bad out-of-conference slate. Now 8-5 as they start to get into thick of Big Ten play. They've really not had success against any. I mean, they've taken care of business against all the teams that they should, but they've struggled against every top team they've played. So they've lost to Virginia Tech, they've lost to Florida State, they've lost to Michigan early on in Big Ten conference play as well. Purdue is a team that I think a lot of people are really high on that thought which I think they still are a fairly good team, but they're a team that I think a lot of people would be competing for the Big Ten title, they'll be a top team in the Big Ten, and right now they haven't really lived up to that pedigree, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I think Purdue hasn't played that well against the better competition, and then I think it's what we've seen from Michigan, who might be one of the schools I'd put in that other category, is that now it looks like, I thought that Michigan would be a good team, but they beat Purdue by 20, didn't they? Something like that.
about 2019.
I didn't think that there was 20 points of separation between
No.
Michigan and Purdue before the season. I thought those two teams would be fairly closely matched at the top of the Big Ten, and I think it's pretty clear that so far Michigan has been the better team. Michigan looks like the cream of the crop in the Big Ten, so I think it's twofold. Yeah, Purdue has struggled, lost to Notre Dame, which isn't a great ACC team this year, but on the other hand, Michigan's played so well that now, even though they've only played, 2 conference games each, and the Big Ten is the one conference that's playing before Christmas now.
Which I hate, by the way.
And the ACC is going to do it next year.
Well, there we go.
But
I don't care what I think.
I just think it's hard to right now envision Purdue running down Michigan.
Yeah.
Already, I don't know. I just don't. I have a hard time seeing it happen.
No, yeah, and Michigan, they are one of those teams that I think was one of the biggest pleasant surprises of the year so far. Number 7 in the country right now. I think that they're on track to be a 1 seed. Obviously, we're in the national championship game last season against Villanova, and they've just kind of hit the ground running the start of this year. You have to give credit to John Beilein, the job that he has done. He is doing things his way, developing talent, getting transfers, doing an incredible job there at Michigan, and they're right now playing like one of the best teams in the country. They have size, they have great guard play as well. They really have everything you want in a contender in college basketball, and I think they're a team as well that they're having success now, but they are going to be ready when it comes to March. They are an experienced team, obviously, from last season, a lot of guys returning, and his teams always seem to be ready for March. They always seem to be ready for the grind, for the pressure of the NCAA tournament. That's a credit to him, is why he's such a great coach. But I've been really impressed with Michigan in the way that they've just gone full speed out the gate at the start of the year.
Who else you got on that list of teams that you think have done better than expected so far?
Well, and it's funny that we mentioned Michigan, because another team from the Big Ten, actually, it's going to be, I guess it's a really Big Ten heavy show here today, is Ohio State. Ohio State is a team that, obviously, in the second year with Chris Holtmann taking the reins from Thad Matta, and I've been really impressed with just the way that they have played, I think, as a cohesive unit. Caleb Weston's been fantastic. He's been averaging like 20 points a game for them, and I was interested to see how they would bounce back after losing a guy like Keita Bates-Diop last year, who was one of the, I think, best players in the entire country. He did it all for them. He scored, he rebounded, he assisted. He was a great defender as well, now playing in the NBA, obviously. I was really interested to see how they would bounce back. And they also are, I think, an experienced senior-laden team as well. I've been impressed with the way that they have kind of pushed through that big loss of Keita Bates-Diop, and they've been a great team as well. And I think, they were a team that started off the year, I want to say like 7-0, 8-0, 9-0 at one point. I mean, they really took care of business early on, had some tough games against Creighton, won those games as well. So I've been really impressed with the Buckeyes in the way that they've kind of started this season. They've exceeded my expectations astronomically for how they would play.
My other big one is St. John's. I think if you'd asked me before the season who comes in last in the Big East, that honestly might have been my pick. And yeah, they've got talent. They've got Shea Pons. They've got Mustafa Haran, who was a transfer who got eligible this year. But they showed nothing last year. Yeah. Nothing at all. And they beat a lot of teams that aren't necessarily all that good. And I do think their record is a bit inflated. They aren't quite as good as their record shows. But I'd have had them in the basement of the Big East. And then they come out and open Big East play, and they beat Marquette by 20 points. I think they're not quite as good as their record looks right now, but it's pretty clear that Chris Mullins has something going on there with that group, especially they have great guard play, and I feel like that's something that if you look around the Big East, there aren't a ton of teams that have like 2-3 guards deep that can go like St. John's can right now, and I think it's a huge surprise. I think when we talk about recruiting, that is a school that, man, if they just put it together once, they're going to be able to build on it so quickly.
Yes. Yeah.
That I really think that they're poised to take a huge step forward in the Big East if they can continue what has been an extremely successful start to the season. And they really came out of nowhere for me.
Yeah, definitely. And what about a team that maybe has had a difficult start to the season that we think could turn things around and still make some noise as I guess conference play starts and the year goes on.
Yeah, I think that the Pac-12 will be better than it's been. I think Arizona State is the team that the Pac-12 hasn't been great, and they didn't have a ton of signature non-conference wins.
Well, the upset win over Kansas from Arizona State.
Yeah, they did. They beat Kansas, but I don't feel like anybody's talking about Arizona State, and
No,
I think
not at all.
and I think people are talking about, man, the Pac-12 is bad, but I think by the time
In every sport.
no, they're great at fencing, gymnastics, swimming.
I feel like rowing.
No, that's all the New England schools.
Oh,
I
yeah,
think.
yeah.
Swimming, they're real good at. But I feel like when we get to March, Arizona State is going to be right there with those other top contenders. I think that they're a talented team, and I think that the fact that the Pac-12 is a bit down is that it's funny because everyone will say it, and then even if you say it, then you go beat all those teams. They're like, oh well, they went, only had 3 losses in conference play. Okay, they're one of the best teams in the country.
Arizona last year.
Yeah, exactly. So I think Arizona State is a team that will. I think they've been good so far, but I think we'll think they're better than people think they are right now come the end of the season.
You mentioned the Pac-12. I think another team that's disappointed, and obviously with the firing of Steve Alford, is UCLA, a team with a ton of talent that everyone was really high on coming out of the Pac-12. I think they had 4 returning starters from last year, and they're 7-5 right now, or they've been awful. He's obviously been fired, so they were a top 20 team to start the year, and UCLA has been a disaster. I think a team that has kind of struggled, or at least struggled in the eyes of, in terms of their reputation or how we would expect them to play, is Villanova early on in the year. But I think Villanova is a team that has lost so many great, experienced players over the last few years. I see Villanova sitting at 10-4 right now as a team that I think could still win the Big East and be a team that is a legitimate contender when it comes to the NCAA tournament. Outside of them in the Big East, I don't think it's necessarily as strong as it's been in some past years.
No, Wichita State, well, they're in the AAC, but Creighton isn't as good. I mean, they're still good, but they aren't as good. And I just think it's a bit of a down year for a lot of the. We call them major conferences, but I mean the ACC is strong. The Big Ten is strong. The Big 12 is strong. I think after you get past those 3, the SEC is not that deep this year. The Pac-12 is obviously struggling. I don't think the Big East is either deep or has elite. When Villanova was one of the best teams in the country, it didn't really matter what the rest of the Big East was doing. But
not at all.
I don't see depth, and the American I don't think is very good at all this year. That's the one.
Yeah.
I mean, that conference has been really pushing as sort of, it's hard to sit here and say that UConn and Wichita and Cincinnati aren't major conference basketball programs because they are certainly major national players, but that conference isn't doing so well yet either.
No, so I think when you look at Villanova, what they have, the returning guys they do have, Eric Pascal, Phil Booth, Colin Gillespie, I think they still have enough experience there and enough talent that once they get into conference play, I mean, they are still 10-4. They have 10 wins. They've just lost to teams like Kansas. They've had some upsets as well. I think
they had a lot of wins that they didn't look that good in.
That's true.
Also, would they beat a team? I watched them play LaSalle, which is a terrible A-10 team. And, I mean, they really let them hang around the entire game. I think they ended up winning by 10 or 12. But, Villanova looked awful in that game, even though it goes down as a win. So
85-78, they only beat LaSalle.
Yeah.
But some of their other, they obviously have that upset loss against Penn, which sent shockwaves around Pennsylvania. But they lose to Michigan early on in the year. They have an overtime loss to Furman, which you don't really like, and then they lose to what was at that time number 1 Kansas. So their losses, or at least 2 of their losses, are to premier programs and some of the best teams in the country. They have 2 ugly ones, but outside of that, they've beaten Florida State. They've beaten UConn, so they have some decent, I guess, some wins out of conference that when you go into the Big East play, this is a team that's gone through 14 games now. They have that talent there that is still there outside of Jalen Brunson and Miles Bridges, the guys that have left. I think they're still a team that could do some damage when it comes to the Big East.
Yeah, I think so. And I think when you look at the kind of East Coast teams, the Northeastern teams. They beat UConn.
Yeah.
A game against St. John's. I think it's coming up in a week or two.
It is January 8th.
That's going to end up being a big game. But if you're looking at that corner of the country, I mean, Syracuse looks pretty down.
Yeah.
Certainly not to the level that they played at last year. In fact, that could be a team that you could put down.
That's another one.
As something of a disappointment. I mean, this is a team that won 3 NCAA tournament games last year, and now is like, if you had to put a field right now, I don't think that'd be in it.
But I have an eerie feeling about Syracuse, that they're another one of those teams that will just kind of figure things out, get in the field, and then...
See, I think that's a team that the way they play...
issues.
The way they play with short prep time like you get in a tournament situation makes it tough. I think you have... especially... the teams that were in the Big East and that are now in the ACC that see it all the time, that's great. But you put them, in a jumbled up bracket and send them out there against, some team, St. Mary's, that has never seen them before.
Yeah.
Syracuse could win that game easily. Even if they're, way underseeded in the game, I think Syracuse could win it because of the way they play. And also, I mean, Jim Boeheim's a great coach.
Yeah,
and that's what wins games. But they have been disappointing to this point, and they're banged up. And they're not they weren't expected to be that deep, and they've had some injury issues. But I think they're better than they've played so far, for sure.
One final disappointment here is, I think, Loyola Chicago. They were obviously everyone's darling. I think they returned 4 starters, including his name escapes me right now, but he was the conference player of the year last season, the guy that really led them to their Final Four appearance. They've been...
And Sister Jean returned also.
Yeah, exactly. They returned 5 starters. But they've been really, I think, disappointing as well. Everyone expected them to be the darling once again, and it just kind of, I think, is a credit to how difficult it is for those teams to have those years. And even though they returned so many guys, I mean... look
at what happened to George Mason from the time that they were in the Final Four, and now they're like a bottom feeder in the A10. I mean, it's really... Getting there once is possible, and even though the odds are long, it's feasible. But making that leap from middle tier, mid major to normal national contender is it's really, really, really hard.
They've pretty much lost every game they've had against a top opponent, whether it's number 5 Nevada.
I give them credit for they played a tough schedule.
They did. They played Nevada.
I feel like they've been on TV every week.
Richmond, Boston College. So credit to them. They wanted to go out and prove themselves, but this is kind of how it backfires. Now you're 8-6, and they could still win their conference. They could still win the conference tournament and get in, but they've kind of been a disappointment in terms of they haven't taken care of that out-of-conference schedule like I think everyone would have hoped. But as, I guess, the non-conference season ends and the conference slate starts to begin, want to touch on a big conference game, the first one in the Jeff Capel era. Panthers taking on the North Carolina Tar Heels this Saturday at noon at the Peterson Event Center. And you know what? Call me optimistic, but I think this is going to be a closer game than a lot of people think, or at least a lot of people thought earlier on in the season. I'm really excited to see how this team, especially with all these young players, like Xavier Johnson, like Trey McGowan's, really excited to see how they fare against, I think, the best coach this team has faced thus far in this season. No respect to, Bob Huggins. But I'm really excited to see how this team is going to fare against a top program early on in the year.
And Carolina's playing really well. I thought they were probably the 3rd or 4th team in the ACC coming into the season. I think right now they're pretty clearly no worse than the 3rd team in the ACC, behind Duke and Virginia, maybe. The way they're playing also really, I think, presents a lot of problems for Pitt, in that they've got length and skilled length in Luke May and Cameron Johnson, 6'10", 6'8", 2 guys that can step out and shoot, 2 guys that can knock down a 3, 2 guys that can get aggressive on the offensive glass, and those are things that Pitt has really struggled with. So I think this is a really big test for Pitt. I think it's a big test for the parts of Pitt's game that are not as well developed. If you look at the 4 and the 5 spot, I think you're going to have huge advantage Carolina throughout the game. On the wing, you're going to have someone like Malik Ellison or Jared Wilson-Frame trying to guard Cameron Johnson, giving up 4 or 5 inches to one of the best 3-point shooters in the country. And we haven't even talked about Nasir Little, who's maybe one of the best 10 freshmen in the country, probably just pure talent-wise, and he's barely playing because he can't break through the rest of this Carolina lineup because they're playing so well.
Yeah, and then that's I think the most interesting thing about this North Carolina team is Nasir Little comes in as one of the top prospects in the country, one of the highest-rated recruits, and he really hasn't played at all. And I always kind of found that interesting that he, I guess, is okay with that because he was one of those guys I feel like that wanted to just play a year and go to the NBA. But he seems to have kind of bought in, and he understands that he's not that great of a defensive player yet. Everyone else is playing better than him, so he is kind of taking his lumps and learning as he goes. But you look at Cameron Johnson. Obviously, I think this is going to be a very emotional game for him. Is this the first time he's returned to the Pete?
Yeah, I talked to Cam back at ACC Operation Basketball, their media day before the season, and he said right away, I can't wait. That's home for me and my family. It's a place that I have a ton of memories in, and it's going to be a really emotional game. I'm interested to see what the reaction is going to be. Probably my guess is 50-50.
I think it'll be 50-50. I hope there's no kind of animosity towards him because, and this is a guy who, he kind of did it the right way. He graduated, he had 2 years of eligibility, and that was also kind of a product of the Stallings era as well.
He was recruited by Coach A, sat through Coach B. I think, you should recognize the situation that the athlete is in and say, look, he doesn't want to play for a second or third coach here at Pitt, and it's recruited by Jamie Dixon, obviously. But Cam's a great guy, a great representative of Pittsburgh and of the University of Pittsburgh. Graduated in 3 years.
I can't even fathom graduating in 3 years
while playing as a Division I athlete. Now he did redshirt one of those years, but that's
regardless.
That's impressive stuff, and he's playing he's playing the best basketball of his career right now.
Absolutely,
I think he's honestly playing his way into like borderline second round pick status.
Absolutely,
from a guy who was a 2-star recruit out of high school.
Exactly, and that's kind of a testament to some guys are just late bloomers. But you look at what his intangibles. He's got length. He can handle the ball a little bit. He's obviously a dead-eye shooter from deep, and you look at it as an NBA prospect, that's what they want. I think he'll still have to improve kind of as an on-ball defender, but he has that length. He's standing, 6'8", he's 6'7",
6'8",
and he's a lethal three-point shooter. He's exactly what NBA teams are looking for. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility at all that he could be a second-round NBA pick. If he continues to play right now, he's averaging 16 points per game, 5 rebounds. He's shooting just under 49% from three. He's one of the best players in the ACC right now. I think another player that I think Pitt is going to have not trouble dealing with, but is going to have to look out for is Seven Woods. Seven Woods is another guy that was a highly touted prospect like Nasir Little, who really hasn't gotten those opportunities on this North Carolina team. Once again, a credit to how good they've played. But he's a guy that I forget what game I was watching. I think it was the Gonzaga game. He just came off the bench and had a career high out of nowhere. And he had double-digit points right off the bench. So he's a guy where if the Panthers are having some success, he's a guy that Roy Williams can always say, all right, Seven, get in the game and you see what you can do. He's still a guy with a lot of talent, which obviously is a lot to learn, but a guy that can get you 15 points if you need him to. He can come off the bench, get steals as well. So I'm really interested to see how Xavier Johnson and this young backcourt matches up with an experienced backcourt, but also when a guy like Seventh Woods comes in the game, a guy who's obviously highly touted that really hasn't had the season that I think everyone expected of him.
And I think that one of the keys here is you talked about two guys in Woods and Little that are coming off the bench right now for Carolina. To me, that is such a huge advantage over what Pitt has coming off the bench.
Exactly.
Obviously Malik Ellison's a good player, but really beyond that, they don't have another guy. Cameron Davis is essentially being used as a defensive specialist. They don't really have another guy that can be that next level contributor off the bench. So they're not as deep. They're not as big. I think the one thing that's interesting is how Pitt is going to match up stylistically. I think Pitt is going to play smaller than usual and try to play faster. And honestly, I'm interested to see what Roy Williams is going to do because there's a lot of Carolina fans that are out there beating the drum for him to play smaller too, to get Nazir Little on the floor and move Luke May to the 5. And if there's a team that they could do it against, it's certainly Pitt. So I'm kind of interested to see how the chess match is going to work out there. Might we see a little bit of Pitt playing 5 guards? I think it's possible.
They're probably going to have to. I mean, because that especially, I think, is something that if foul trouble were to become an issue, I mean, that's definitely something that we could see on Saturday is Jeff Capel saying, let's try it. I mean, let's see what's going to happen. My only kind of concern there is, and this goes kind of back to the depth difference on these two teams. Now you have Sidney and Deere out for, a month or so? Or
another month.
Yeah, another month. And it's going to be Xavier Johnson playing, 34 minutes in this game.
Oh, I would expect
36.
Johnson, assuming there's no foul trouble, I would expect Johnson and McGowens to play north of 35 minutes.
Yeah.
Going forward.
Yeah, so I'm that's the one I think concern for Pitt here is UNC can, like I talked about 7th Woods, they can just throw platoon after platoon at you of different backcourts, different lineups. They can go 9 deep or so and still probably be better than Pitt, whatever lineup they put out there. That's something that I think is going to be a concern is how the Panthers are going to have to kind of withstand wave after wave of different top-tier players coming at you. And that's going to be really, I think, something to watch throughout the game is just how, I guess not survive isn't the right word, but the way that they just, I guess, pace themselves. Or Xavier Johnson can just kind of hold on and stay, relaxed isn't the word either, I guess, just keep from wearing out.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a really key. And they played a lot in Pitt's final non-conference game, Johnson and McGowens did. And I think it was for that reason because, it was a non-conference game and Pitt was winning by 20. Jeff Capel certainly could have gone and played some walk-ons, but he wanted those guys to play 40 minutes because they're going to play 40 minutes or thereabouts all the time. Got a quick, I don't know, maybe some kind of bold prediction for Saturday's game? Putting you on the spot here.
Yeah, I know.
I've got one. I think I don't know how bold it is, but I think Cam Johnson's going to score 20 points, and I think Luke May is going to have a double-double, and I think Pitt is going to probably keep the game close but end up losing by double digits.
Yeah, I think I'm not going to straight up pick the Panthers, but I do think that I think that Pitt is going to really contend in this game. I mean, they've been in every game they've played this year.
Yeah.
Even against West Virginia, when I guess they probably looked their worst, or at least looked the most overmatched, they lost that game by 10 points.
Yeah.
Or even, yeah.
Yeah, it was a 6-point game with a minute or two left.
Yeah, they lost by 10 points, 69-59. So I think Pitt will be in this game throughout. I honestly think the Panthers will lose close. I think maybe UNC wins by 5. I just don't think that Pitt will have enough, especially with their depth issues now, to get over the hump against a team that is playing as well as UNC. But the reason why I give Pitt so much credit is because Pitt's been playing really well also.
They play so hard.
They do, and they play with a fire and a passion that Pitt fans haven't seen in 3 years or so.
Maybe 5.
Maybe 5, exactly. So I think 3 straight wins, obviously against some inferior competition, but they've looked good, and they've gotten Trey McGowens going again. Xavier Johnson has remained steady. Audice Toney has kind of got his scoring going as well. So all these young players are starting to get into a groove here. Wilson Frame's kind of getting back and getting his shot back as well. So I think Pitt comes in hot. UNC comes in hot as well, but I think UNC edges Pitt by maybe 5 points or so. But I think it's a game that'll get a lot of Pitt fans that kind of left the program over the last 3 years or so. I think this is the game and a performance that can kind of get people to buy back in. And that's really what I think this team is looking for this season. They're not going to win. They're not going to win the ACC. They're not
probably not even going to go to the NCAA tournament.
Exactly. But I think what this season is all about is convincing those fans who left to come back to this program. And I think a good performance against UNC this weekend can do a lot to kind of forward that mission that they have.
Sold out, Pete, first time in 23 months.
It's impressive, and I don't think that it's just because of the opponent.
I mean, they sold out North Carolina. They sold out Duke. Yeah, those are the premier games on the schedule. But I agree with you. I think it's going to be a lot of Pitt fans.
Yeah,
that are excited about this team, and that's really something that we haven't been able to say for a long time.
Absolutely. So that'll do it for us today on this edition of the Corner 3 on Pittsburgh Sports Live here in the Beaver County Auto Studios. Once again, we thank you for tuning in, and always remember to subscribe. Helps us out a lot here. And also, want to wish you a Happy New Year. Kind of forgot to do that at the top of the show. Final thing here, Alan. What's your resolution?
My New Year's resolution is to unsubscribe from stupid email lists that I don't read and clutter my inbox.
I like it.
I'm going to have a less cluttered
2019.
What do you got?
Honestly, it's kind of one that everyone else kind of does, but we're trying to get back in shape. I hear Pitt basketball's got some depth issues. I'm a knockdown 3-point shooter, so I'm trying to get back into shape by maybe.
I hear I hear there's an opening for a practice player now because Onye has been moved from practice player to walk on.
Yeah.
So maybe you could go be a practice player and just get dunked on all day long.
You know what? I have no shame. I think I'd be okay with it as long as I can get some gear. I mean, I'm cool with it. So no problem at all. But with that, that'll do it for us here today on the Corner 3 on Pittsburgh Sports Live. We'll be back with you next week.